This case is unlike any that I've seen in almost a 40-year career. So there are so many different tentacles to this. It's very complex. But I don't think anything's bothered me more than what's occurred in Carroll County, Indiana, in my entire lifetime.
On November 21st, 2016, this home on East Columbia Street in Flora was engulfed in flames. Keone, Kiara, Carrielle, and Kiana didn't make it out of the home alive, only their mother, Galen Rose.
Is Galen Rose considered a suspect in this case?
State Fire Marshal's office ruled the fire was intentionally set. This announcement was followed by several officials involved in this ongoing investigation resigning. Now, Indiana State Police First Sergeant Jerry Holman says ISP is the lead investigative agency in this case.
If I'm teaching a class on the Delphi murders, I am requiring Intro to Flora Fire as a prerequisite. It's imperative to understand what happened 3 months before in a town over before we can lay the foundation for our understanding of what actually happened to Abby and Libby. This video will not be a summary of the complex Flora arson case. I do have a playlist analyzing this case, which I will link in the description if you want to dive deeper. Instead, I will focus on these key factors, which I have identified as possible overlapping motives and colliding circumstances which contributed to setting the stage for the double homicide. Keep in mind, the Flora fire is just one of 8 tentacles which I've identified as the key motivating factors in the Delphi murders case. I will be uploading videos dissecting and providing receipts and analysis for the other tentacles as well. The first topic that must be addressed is racial violence and extremist ideologies. The demographics speak for themselves. According to the 2023 U.S. Census data, Carroll County has a population of 20,525 people, 96% of whom are white, and Black or African Americans make up only 1% of the population. Comparatively, the state of Indiana at large is 83.7% white and 10.4% Black or African American. Despite this jarring statistic, between the years 2016 and 2021, which is a 5-year period, there were 5 people murdered in Flora, Indiana. All of the homicide victims were Black, which is a statistical anomaly that warrants further investigation, in my personal opinion. Moreover, Carroll County and specifically Flora have a rich history of racial tension and persecution, which includes public lynchings. This sentiment of the population at large is no better illustrated, in my opinion, than the way these tragic events were responded to by the public and law enforcement, with the Delphi case getting significantly more attention, empathy, and donations. I personally see the Flora arson as a modern-day lynching with underlying economic, political, and social implications that motivated the people that did it. These people always cash in on the chaos and devastation. That's part of their MO. But diving deeper into specific Delphi connections, Delphi suspect Brad Holder posted this image on Facebook on November 20th, 2016. The day before the fire that occurred around 3 a.m. on the 21st. In the post, Holder describes attending a blot, which is the Norse word for sacrifice. Jaeger Tyerson was Patrick Westfall's alias on Facebook, indicating that it was Westfall's residence where the blot took place. So where was Patrick Westfall living in November 2016? Well, according to public records, he had addresses in both Delphi and Flora. The Delphi house at 404 Union Street is a larger duplex with a small yard, while the address in Flora has a bit more space for something like a bonfire pictured here. When looking at the aerial imagery of the Flora address associated with Westfall, an interesting change on the property occurs between 2017 and 2018. The detached garage at this address seems to have disappeared while Westfall was living there. 218 South Division Street is 9 houses down from Galen's rental, which stood on the corner of East Columbia and South Division Street. While I can't definitively identify the location where this photograph was taken, it is a fact that Westfall maintained a residence that was 525 feet away from where Galen was raising her 4 precious daughters, who were absolutely thriving in Flora. In addition to their Norse pagan beliefs and practices, Westfall and Holder are also members of the racist skinhead group called the Vinlanders Social Club, also known as Firm 22, and have publicly endorsed a white supremacist ideology. In Allen's request for Frank's hearing, the defense points to testimony from Brad's former wife, Amber Holder, documented on page 10 of the Odin Report, where Amber said that Brad told her that Westfall and his crew were responsible for, quote-unquote, the girls in Delphi and a fire that killed the 4 girls in Flora. Amber said that Brad told her Westfall had friends in several states and they have no problem killing, quote, race traitors, end quote, which Amber explained she believed meant to be white people who, quote-unquote, mix with other races. Amber said that Brad told her that Patrick Westfall had killed a lot of people and it didn't matter if they were, quote, innocent or not, end quote. It's additionally mentioned in the memo that Brad Holder told Amber Holder that, quote, Westfall and his people killed Abigail Williams and Liberty German because one of their mothers was mixing with other people outside the mother's race, end quote. Examining this image further, Westfall and Holder are pictured with who appears to be an adult female, as well as 5 children of varying ages. The group is standing around what looks to be a burning tree stump with 4 sawed-off branches and 2 knives sticking out of the stump. What could the 4 branches from the burning tree represent? Perhaps the 4 souls that died in a fire hours later? And what about the 2 knives? I would like to know if these missing branches were similar to, if not the branches that were staged over the victims at the Delphi crime scene. Despite tyrannical Judge Gull's orders to keep any testimonies related to Odinism or third-party suspects out of the trial, the defense revealed information about these branches in several court filings, including the 136-page Frank's memo. Specifically, the defense disclosed that at least one of the sticks placed on Abby had a clean, smooth edge, suggesting that it was cut with a saw and brought to the scene rather than sourced nearby and used as some sort of attempt at concealing the bodies. Defense experts barred by Judge Gull opined that the branch placement on the victims was not random and appeared ritualistic in nature, as if someone was trying to replicate runes. Within the long list of exhibits submitted to the court with the Frank's memo included an alleged photograph of Patrick Westfall cutting branches into runes with an electrical saw. This image was posted to Facebook by Holder with the caption, quote, cutting runes, end quote. Moreover, Holder's Facebook page made many references to runes, rituals, and heathenry reminiscent of the ghoulish crime scene. Given Holder's post describing performing a blot ritual with Patrick Westfall the night before the fatal fire, one has to ask if the 4 sisters were also sacrificed in a ritualistic manner. Was the November ritual related to or in preparation for the Valis blot ritual in Delphi? Amber Holder's indication that Westphal had powerful friends and many people backing him is supported by Unified Command's lack of investigation into the pair, clearing them almost immediately, as well as withholding and even destroying evidence pertaining to Brad Holder, making sure none of it came out in trial. Brad Holder is a loud and proud Freemason. He even has a tattoo of a large Masonic square and compass on his chest. I suspect Jerry Holman is also a Mason, as he is frequently seen throwing the square and compass hand signal at Delphi press conferences specifically. Most damning, however, is the fact that Nick McClelland is a Master Mason, and there is evidence to indicate that McClelland and Holder even belong to the same lodge, Tipton Lodge number 33 in Logansport, as both were featured on the lodge's Facebook page. If you don't know by now, Masons take an oath to do everything in their power to protect their fellow Masons. And I suspect that is why Brad Holder was never treated as a suspect from the beginning of the investigation to the trial of Richard Allen. Switching gears a bit, I want to discuss the political climate in Delphi before, during, and after November 2016, and why I think it's entirely relevant to the tragedies that took place in Flora and Delphi. This is actually the very first motive I ever zeroed in on when I started looking into these cases on a deeper level, because of a pattern I noticed with some of the few powerful local figures monetizing and even politicizing these events that resulted in the deaths of young girls. I believe the series of events I will summarize here paints a compelling picture for one of the underlying political motivations for the fire, and I'm interested in finding out if you agree. In October 2016, the month before the fire, Delphi Mayor Shane Evans and his political allies Dick Bradshaw and Sam Dywert were pushing the Delphi City Council to vote to enforce building regulations that had been adopted by the city in the 1990s but were never actually enforced. However, the Delphi City Council was unanimously opposed to enforcing these building codes because of concerns that more regulations would drive out lower-income residents who may not be able to afford to bring their properties up to code. Despite the council and public at large's disapproval, Mayor Evans threatened to veto their vote. Tensions were flaring, and the dispute even made it on the local news in October.
The city of Delphi has had a building ordinance on the books for 24 years now, but it's rarely been enforced. News 18's Brad Oppenheim tells us how there are plans to start enforcing it again, but some city officials say they're not completely on board.
In 1992, the city of Delphi passed an ordinance adopting the Indiana Administrative Code on Building Regulations. It addresses building safety, including electrical, mechanical, and plumbing codes. While a building commissioner is in charge of inspecting buildings, the ordinance has rarely been enforced in the past 2.5 decades. Mayor Shane Evans says he wants to change that.
It's there to benefit the public. I mean, it's there for health and safety. It's there to make sure that the investment you make in your property is going to be a sound investment. I think anybody comes into a community and assumes that there are building regulations that have been in place.
Evans says he believes the code could be modernized, but he would like to see the ordinance enforced once again.
We want to make sure we don't leave any stone unturned, that we parse through the language of the ordinance and make sure that it meets our needs.
But some Delphi City Council members want to see the ordinance repealed. Councilman-at-large Michael Shockley has some concerns.
I just want to see us go down a road that is going to cost a lot of people a lot of money to live here and to build here and that kind of stuff.
In a letter to the city council, Evans said if an ordinance is passed to repeal the original building ordinance, he will veto it.
Faith that city council and I will be able to sit down and reach some middle ground on this.
Evans says the topic will be up for discussion at the next city council meeting on November.
One city councilman in particular, Dale Seward, actively opposed Evans' building code agenda and was not quiet about it.
And I agree that we need minimum standards with different aspects and different things we do. But you can't sit here and tell me that more government regulation translates into prosperity for any city or any town.
On November 2nd, Seward expressed his general disapproval with Evans and the Board of Works in an opinion piece in the Carroll County Comment, compellingly entitled "Hiding in Plain Sight." Seward complains of the lack of transparency between the Board of Works and the City Council as well as the public at large. He even writes that Delphi residents should contact Mayor Evans and express their displeasure with this form of government. They should do it now. This culture of concealment should be stopped immediately.
To the killer, who may be in this room, we believe you are hiding in plain sight.
It's clear that in early November, Councilman Seward felt there was something nefarious going on with the Delphi Board of Works meetings, and it's quite possible that his intuition was on point. The Delphi Board of Works met on November 17th, 2016, 4 days before the Flora fire. One item on these meeting notes caught my attention regarding the controversial issue of unsafe building codes. It stated in the meeting notes that the mayor should look into what makes a building unsafe by law and to contact Flora to see if they desire to, quote-unquote, share a building inspector. I believe that this is code for something much more sinister. If the mayor were to hypothetically contact Flora to discuss unsafe building codes, specifically regarding fire safety and electrical codes concerning multifamily dwellings, he would likely contact Flora Town President Josh Ayers, who also happens to be Galen's landlord and owner of True Value hardware stores in Delphi and Flora. The Board of Works clearly had an agenda, but they needed a tragedy to enact the levels of control that they desired. It should also be noted that one of the Board of Works members, Sam Dywert, owned an insurance company in Delphi called Dywert Insurance. I speculate that increased regulations and inspections required by these stringent codes would be profitable for his business. I also suspect a long-term goal for targeting quote-unquote unsafe multifamily dwellings is to continue the gentrification of Delphi by targeting these older duplex-style buildings. Galen Rose's rental at 103 East Columbia was the perfect house to make an example of, as it was a balloon-style wooden frame dwelling with 2 separate units, and it had a myriad of plumbing and electrical issues. If only they could get someone, perhaps a local criminal with extreme racist beliefs, to start the fire, the Board of Works could use the tragedy to enhance their political agenda, and Ayers can cash in on the insurance policy, which he did. It seems like a foolproof plan, as long as the fire was ruled unintentional. In fact, the Board of Works members didn't waste any time politicizing the girls' deaths, as evidenced by a letter sent out by Dywert the same day of the fatal fire. He callously writes that although the cause of the fire is undetermined at this point, this event underscores the risks involved for multifamily dwellings, especially those in converted single-family homes. He also cites the inadequate electrical wiring and callously states that if Flora had building codes and effective enforcement, any deficient condition could have been discovered and corrected, and maybe today 4 children would be alive and those injured would not have had their lives disrupted in such a traumatic and violent event. He concludes by saying, as the mayor continues to construct a building code enforcement policy and process, I encourage you to keep in mind the importance to the well-being and safety of our community of efficient oversight and enforcement of codes for residential, multifamily, and commercial buildings. I am certain the town of Flora is asking themselves this morning if there was more they could have done to prevent this tragedy. 9 days after the Flora fire, on December 1st, 2016, another wood-framed multifamily dwelling caught fire in the middle of the night, but thankfully no one was hurt.
Early morning fire destroyed a Delphi family's home, and although everyone did make it out safely, the Delphi fire chief says it's a reminder of the importance of smoke detectors. News 18's Samantha Tiki joins us now with a look at why the family is so lucky to be alive. Sam?
Yes, Delphi Fire Chief Daryl Sterrett says the house fire appears to have started in the home's attic and electrical issues may have been a factor. Now that the smoke has cleared, the Delphi family who once lived there is counting their blessings. It's a wake-up call Delphi resident Luz Cruz says she'll never forget.
And I really didn't hear anything until my aunt started screaming that the house was on fire.
Around 5 a.m. Thursday, Delphi fire crews were called to Cruz's home in the 300 block of North Washington Street. Cruz and 7 others, including an infant, made it out safely.
I just panicked. And I just went outside.
After exiting the home, the family realized the home next door was in danger. That's when they alerted neighbor Kim Jenkins.
Flames were shooting everywhere. The smoke was so bad you couldn't even see.
Jenkins, her husband, and 3 grandchildren were able to get out safely. She says there were no smoke detectors in her home and would not have known about the fire if the neighbors hadn't told her.
It could have played out a whole lot different for both families. It really could have, because the houses are so close together.
Cruz thinks her home had 1 smoke detector, but she didn't know if it was working properly. Delphi Fire Chief Daryl Sterrett says Cruz did not find any smoke detectors in the house. Jenkins says she's learned her lesson when it comes to fire safety and is having a smoke detector installed Thursday afternoon.
Make sure you have smoke detectors in your house. Make sure you have a plan to know what you're supposed to do.
Cruz says although her personal belongings are gone, she's trying to look on the bright side.
I'm really happy that we are all okay.
Is this a coincidence or an action intended to justify increased regulations and control pursuant to the Board of Works agenda? Councilman Seward made his feelings known, calling Dywart's letter disgusting and called on him as well as Evans to resign.
In Delphi is accusing another city leader of using the November 21st fire in Flora that killed 4 children to advance a political agenda.
But quite frankly, that letter is, I think it's disgusting and terrible.
Councilman Dale Seward says this letter was nothing more than a political stunt.
Mr. Dyward should resign. And if you knew about it beforehand, you should resign too, because that thing is terrible.
Sam Dywart's letter says the fire underscored the risks involved for multi-family dwellings and suggests the Flora home was unsafe. He says proper enforcement could have saved the 4 young lives lost in the fire. Ultimately, the letter encourages the council to support a new building code enforcement policy that Mayor Shane Evans has been working on since July.
I've communicated very clear to the City Council about my support of code enforcement, to appointing an administrative arm of the city to where they can issue permits, and I think that contractors should be licensed and they need to get permits, and they need to make sure that they have bonds and insurance, just like Lafayette did.
But whether the building code enforcement policy needs to be changed wasn't exactly the reason Seward says he spoke up at the meeting.
He's basically taking 4 people's deaths and a mother who was in the hospital at the time and 2 of our emergency personnel from the county, and he's basically politicizing it.
But that's not how Dywart sees it, and neither did Councilman Brian Garrison.
People are dying. I believe what he's trying to say is why we're him hauling around, it's liable to happen to us.
Mayor Evans doesn't want to get involved in the argument, but says the city is moving forward with discussions of enforcement and possibly amending the current building code ordinance.
Admittedly, Dywart and Evans have a point regarding fire safety and code compliance. As Dale Seward acknowledged, it is certainly best practice for a city or town to comply with codified standards and regulations, especially for rental properties where landlords can be unmotivated to maintain adequate living standards for their tenants, who are ultimately the ones who suffer from a lack of code enforcement. Had the cause of the fire been ruled as a result of an electrical or occupancy issue, and then the Board of Works used the incident to promote the necessity of code enforcement, it'd be a different story, and honestly, I would agree with this sentiment. Isn't that the point of these kinds of regulations? To avoid preventable fatalities and ensure the safety of residents? But that's not what happened here. This was murder, misrepresented to promote a predetermined agenda. It is not the truth that the Flora fire could have been prevented by building code enforcement. Unsurprisingly, no correction, acknowledgement, or apology was ever issued by Dywart or Evans. These circumstances, including the timing of the ongoing political dispute over building codes, which conveniently contemplate fire safety and electrical issues, and specifically target multi-unit converted single-family homes, all characteristics embodied by the Columbia Street house, the monetary conflicts of interest, the immediate politicization in the aftermath of the tragedy prior to an origin and cause determination, and a bizarrely similar fire occurring in Delphi just 9 days later. These circumstances, when viewed in their totality, are extremely suspicious and make me think back to that November 17th Board of Works meeting where Evans is tasked with defining an unsafe building according to state law and contacting Flora for collaboration. The urgency of this agenda is also a factor. As Evans notes, he wants to review and work on this before the end of the first quarter in 2017. Was this a carefully calculated but sloppily executed plan, or just coincidental circumstances? You tell me.
Who set that fire? Now listen, I don't believe that anybody set it to intentionally to kill those 4 little girls. I don't believe that. I hope I'm not proven wrong. I think it was a consequence of a bad choice. And again, I hope somebody will talk to us one day.
What would you say to the person who did this if they're watching this tonight?
What I want to say is I don't think you intended to do what you did. I don't think that they intended to kill 4 little girls. I don't. That's me. That's my own opinion. I don't believe they intended to do that. I believe they intended to send some type of a message. And I don't know what the message was.
Thus far, I think I've laid the groundwork for my claims that this crime was racially or ideologically motivated, or at least intended to be perceived that way, with additional political and economic implications that overlap with the Delphi murders.
In November 2016, the state fire marshal's office said the cause of the fire was undetermined. However, in January 2017, investigators at the Indiana Department of Homeland Security said the fire had been set intentionally.
We are investigating it as an arson.
Fire investigators believe someone intentionally set this fire, has just added to the devastation.
After the peer review was conducted by Indianapolis Fire Department, the IDHS confirmed the official ruling that the fire was intentionally set. This happened on January 28, 2017. This is a very important date. At this point in time, anyone and everyone involved was suddenly on the hook for, at minimum, 4 counts of homicide. Some noteworthy anomalies took place in the 2.5-week period between the official arson ruling and the double homicide in the woods. According to Delphi City Council meeting notes from February 6, 2017, it was discovered on January 29th, the day after the arson ruling, that $18,000 in unauthorized transactions had been defrauded from the city's finances. All but $400 had been returned to the account, and it could be unrelated, but it's suspicious nonetheless, especially when considering who had access to the city's finances at this time. In the days to follow, leading into early February, various private and federal investigators came forward to cast doubt on the integrity of investigator Dennis Randall's origin and cause findings, which would lead to his subsequent resignation. I imagine that the conspirators began to feel uneasy at this moment in time, likely doubting, for the first time, the scope of their political influence over this investigation. Is it a coincidence that 2.5 weeks after this landmark finding, 2 teens are murdered in a shocking and grisly manner just a town over, an event that totally eclipsed the Flora fire in the news, the public consciousness, and even the investigative resources and attention of Indiana State Police? If one motivation for committing the Delphi homicides was to distract and disrupt the Flora investigation, then mission accomplished. But then there's also this nagging fact that Libby's grandma, Becky Patty, appraised the Flora house just 2 months before it went up in flames. Now, I'm willing to concede small town coincidences. Not every overlapping connection is nefarious or suggests a grand conspiracy. I'm sure there are a limited number of accredited appraisers in rural Indiana. Fine. But that doesn't answer my lingering questions about this appraisal or stop me from speculating if Libby had uncovered privileged information regarding the fire, which leads me to my final topic, insurance fraud. The property on East Columbia Street was appraised on September 10th, 2016 by Becky Patty per her own admission. The over 1,800 square foot converted duplex with 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms appraised for a mere $45,000. For reference, similar or even smaller properties on the same block are, for the most part, valued in the $100,000 range. So this tells you a thing or two about the shape of this property. But why was the appraisal ordered in the first place? According to Josh Ayers' civil deposition, which supports Becky's comment, the bank ordered the appraisal in connection to a refinance of the home. Ayers and Helderman took ownership of the property under Birch Tree Holdings, LLC in December 2015, the previous year, from Josh's parents who owned the property for many years. The exchange was pretty informal, so it makes sense that the property was never appraised. So everything to this point checks out. In his deposition, Ayers admits that it is uncommon for him to refinance his shared rental properties, but he explains that he believed the home had some equity in it and they wanted access to the cash to do other projects with. He also admits that he doesn't remember where this cash went. So it appears that they got the home appraised and cashed out between September and the time of the November fire. Suspicious timing? Sure. But here's where things get super fishy. And I have to give credit to I-Team 8 for doing actual journalism and exposing this insurance policy in their multi-part investigative series from earlier this year. A couple weeks before the appraisal, on August 31st, 2016, an insurance policy was taken out on the house in the amount of approximately $392,000.
Most people would apply logic to say that there's some impropriety here.
The insurance policy, originally written August 31st of 2016, the appraisal dated 10 days later, September 10th. A little over 2 months later, November 21st, the home had gone up in flames.
Up to $392,000 for a house that was appraised at $45,000.
Correct.
You're saying that's quite odd.
It's quite unusual. When an insurance policy starts to look like a lottery ticket, suspicion can be raised. Insurance fraud.
But of course you're thinking, no way the homeowners were able to collect any of that, right? You know, with the whole arson determination finding. Well, unfortunately, Ayers took out additional coverage for his rental properties, including loss of rent and, get this, acts of terrorism coverage. This additional policy insured 103 East Columbia for an amount of $105,000 and was taken out in mid-October 2016, 1 month before the house was set on fire. From the sparse documentation I could get my hands on, it appears a property damage claim was paid to Birch Tree Holdings. While the amount paid is unknown, coverage included the $105,000 for the structure, $2,500 in personal property, and $10,500 in loss of rent. Ayers also testified in his deposition that he did receive money after the fire as a result of his insurance policy. Simply put, the house was worth more incinerated than functioning as a rental property. When reviewing the testimony from the civil lawsuit, it's clear that the condition of the property was abysmal. The testimony from the tenant who rented a unit in the property prior to Galen stated that the house had electrical and plumbing issues, specifically a water leak out of the kitchen light fixture, as well as multiple power outages resulting from the circuit breakers popping. Galen Rose made similar complaints, including non-functioning electrical outlets, lack of smoke detectors, and non-locking doors prior to the fire. And who gets the call for all these issues? Josh Ayers, who owns multiple businesses in town and probably doesn't have a lot of spare time to deal with these issues. Galen rented the unit for $500 month to month, so double that for the unit upstairs. The property was only bringing in around $1,000 per month in rent. One has to wonder if Ayers was getting tired of his new title as landlord, which appears to include a lot of hassle and responsibilities for a comparatively small monthly income. But how would he get out of this predicament? It's against the law in Indiana for a landlord to kick out a tenant without due cause. But a devastating fire would end all current lease agreements, get this property off their hands, and result in a six-figure payout for the owners. And Ayers and Helderman would know this because it's happened to them before, just 3 years prior. In August 2013, a storage barn in Flora owned and used by Climatech Heating and Cooling, which is Ayers and Helderman's HVAC business, was completely destroyed by a fire and incurred additional costly damages. The pair had only owned the barn for 3 years before the fire, and while it is unclear what kind of damages were recovered, I don't doubt that this fire also resulted in a significant payday for the duo, and possibly a blueprint on how to commit arson-related insurance fraud, allegedly in my opinion. Even the family business, Ayers Hardware, which has been in operation since 1901, has a history of destructive fires that only seem to result in positive outcomes for the business. The first in February 1923, when a fire destroyed most of their merchandise and severely damaged the interior of the building, and another in 1976, which damaged the upper storeroom. As town president, Ayers is basically the boss of Flora Fire Chief Adam Randall, son of Dennis Randall, who would follow in his father's footsteps, resigning from his position following scrutiny over the Flora fire investigation.
Adam Randall had also resigned as Flora's fire chief. Adam Randall's boss, before his resignation, had been Josh Ayers, the president of the Flora Town Council and the owner and landlord of the home where Rose lived. Did potential conflicts of interest get in the way of the investigation? Did small-town politics play a role?
It's not difficult to see how small-town politics can be leveraged into favorable outcomes for the long-standing Flora Town president, who comes from a large and influential family and presently owns multiple businesses in the community. The fact that Josh Ayers never even spoke to Galen after the fire, but had no issue collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars in blood money, is appalling. After the fire, Galen left town to be with family and mourn her tremendous loss, and the good old boys of Carroll County were able to completely control the narrative and attempt to interfere with the investigation, in my opinion, silencing anyone with the courage to speak up through intimidation, fear, and force. This is the Carroll County way. My intention with this series is to show you, with evidence, how, when it comes to the Delphi murders, the tentacles themselves have their own intertwining appendages, which require a great deal of nuanced thinking to unravel and draw conclusions from. I'm not claiming to have all the motivations and surrounding circumstances sorted out. My tentacles graphic is to show you what I believe this case to be about, based on years of focused research that extends far beyond the convoluted events of February 13th and 14th, 2017. I will do my best to compile the year's worth of evidence I have collected and analyzed in order to arrive at these theoretical conclusions. As always, thank you for listening, keep asking questions, and please let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below.